All right, hey, welcome back. Hopefully you guys enjoyed our last week of our filming, and well, hey, you know what? We have talked a lot about some important events leading up to this war, and just getting all of the ins and outs, and looking at how these world leaders are starting to come together and become really the people of the 1930s and into the 40s.
Well, the people we know.
Yes.
From our history books, even those
yeah.
those simple books I used to read when I was a kid that just cover the big guys.
Right.
We're running into those people now.
Of course we are.
We're running into the Guderians and the Hitlers and the Daladiers and the Chamberlains and the Churchills.
Yes.
And
so you're right. And like we will see, this is the run up to the war in 1939.
Yeah, really. We're just kind of start with the idea of we looked a little bit about Hitler's domestic policy. We talked a little bit about the Autobahns and work projects, things that he designed to help push the German economy out of the Depression. But then he started doing stuff outside of Germany, and it seems like, in a lot of ways, a lot of the stuff seems little, especially the first two we're going to talk about, didn't really meet with a lot of pushback.
Well, you got to realize again, like what we have here on the map, this area that is taken from Hitler, from Germany, in 1919, 1920, it's very important into their economy, into their infrastructure, and well, I don't think any major power, especially in the 1920s and 30s, once this depression is really set in as a full-fledged worldwide economic disaster, they're going to buck the system. They're going to really say, oh, Germany, no, 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 because they want to help their fellow man.
Right. Yeah, well, the French especially aren't going to be on that list.
Right.
They're the ones that still have troops in the Rhineland.
Right.
The British had withdrew theirs back in the 20s because they needed them in Palestine or some other place to shoot at colonials.
Whoever they were fighting that month in their overseas colonies. But
right. And Britain has always had a kind of a reluctance to have a large army close to home.
Well,
you can have a big army in India, it's fine,
sure,
but don't have it close to home.
Their people really don't like having
weapons
on their streets,
That Third Amendment for us kind of speaks to that same idea as English juniors.
Exactly.
But when we talk about the Ruhr, the Rhineland,
right,
this whole area is demilitarized, which means the Germans can't have any fortifications, they can't have any military troops in there at all. So the best you have is some police. But that means Germany can't do anything to the east, because if the French come in, they got nothing to stop them. They can just barge all the way through Germany in a matter of weeks because there's just nothing in the way.
Right.
And Germany, despite Hitler's bellicose talk, isn't going to build a defensive line at Mannheim or Karlsruhe or Frankfurt. He's going to be wanting to get it all the way to this western border. And the French troops left in 1930, so it's a demilitarized zone for everybody now. Correct. One side because of treaty, the other side because of commitment.
Right.
And in 1930, of course, with the Great Depression, the French were a little bit humane. They did negotiate the fact that troops would leave, and they reduced the reparations payments.
Which is good, hey.
They didn't reduce the amount of reparations.
But just
This is like your car company saying, hey, you don't have to pay your payment in December. Now, granted, it's going to get tacked on the end of your loan, and we're going to collect interest, but whatever.
Yeah, they're going to make money somehow, some way, any way they want.
It sounds great when you're trying to pay for Christmas presents, but it's not so good because it's not taking anything off the end.
Right.
But the French, I guess, had given up on the idea of keeping Germany permanently contained. Now, they spent the early 1920s, they made treaties with Poland and Czechoslovakia and Romania and Hungary to help what they call a cordon sanitaire, a way to keep Germany contained.
Right.
But even they started building the Maginot Line in 1929. So obviously they didn't think they were going to be able to maintain this.
You also think about it this way. By that time, even though the Nazi Party is still in its infancy, it is starting to grow, and with that issue of, especially in the late 20s, early 30s, that ripple effect of the Great Depression, French socialists and the Nazi Party, they're building up steam. The French don't want to see something like this going on. The French are afraid.
Well, it probably wouldn't be hard for their intelligence services to read between the lines that the Social Democrats in Germany keep losing position because they're not verbally assaulting the Treaty of Versailles like Hitler. And even the communists are trashing the French for this Treaty of Versailles, these restrictions. But really it just comes down to it's a PR stunt almost. Well, it ends up a PR stunt. It literally, by rule, should have been a declaration of war.
Right.
Because that's what the treaty said. Any movement of German troops into the Rhineland would be considered an assault on France and Great Britain. But, when Hitler decides to do it, he's done. We haven't had Kristallnacht, but we've had the Night of the Long Knives. The SA is destroyed as a group, and so the army's now loyal. They've sworn their little Hitler oath and their little Boy Scout thing. It's always funny to me being a Boy Scout growing up and then seeing the lines of troops doing this. Like, well, really, But
anyway,
he sends troops in there, and nobody does anything.
And it is something quite interesting to see, because again, this is an army that does not have much of your military force. They're riding in on horseback. They're walking, whatever the case may be. There are no major military operations of tanks. There are no not missiles. Of course, they don't have missiles. There's no artillery.
There's not like
there's
a
no major. There's nothing. There's no. It's literally they just waltz in, and the French say, "Okay, well. All right, yeah, technically you're there and it's your area. We demilitarized it, but hey, we're going to allow it to happen anyway because, well, we understand that things happen."
But the, I don't know. I guess the thing is when you look at democracies, France and Great Britain,
right?
There's probably quite a few people who've had 10 years to look at this Treaty of Versailles, and no matter how much they hated Germany, they realize this is a treaty that Hitler is getting a lot of traction with.
Right.
And then the Rhineland, of course, by the time we get to 1936, he's had 3 full years in office to bang on that drum.
Of course.
And the problem is, as a Brit or a Frenchman, how do you say, well, we're right? We've destroyed your economy, now pay us back.
Right.
It'd be like that payday loan. We're going to take your job away
because
you haven't. We'll loan you some money. How about that?
Yeah, let's just keep that going.
Yeah, we'll just keep that going.
Just having 600% interest, but neither here nor there.
Right.
The idea, of course, is that the French, they start to go a little lax, and they understand that it just kind of has to happen.
Well, I think, again, because they started the Maginot Line a year before this happens, I think in a lot of ways it was probably in their thinking that the Germans were eventually going to demand that they have their territory back as a sovereign state.
Right.
And so it's not a big deal to the French. The problem is their credibility overseas. Not overseas. On the other side of it,
yeah.
Is that Czechoslovakia and Poland and Romania, especially Romania, starts to look other places for support. Now, the biggest problem with that for all those Eastern European countries is none of them are communist.
No.
And they don't want to have anything to do with Uncle Joe or his communist rule, because in Hungary there's Admiral Horthy, who's a fascist on the same lines as Mussolini or Hitler. Polish government is basically the same thing.
It's a puppet state.
It's almost a junta. Romania's got a king who's typically fairly pro-German, but not excessively so.
Sure.
Czechoslovakia is the only real functioning democracy, but it's a small little country.
It is. It is a very small country, and again, when you have these major powers, I wouldn't say major, but at least these somewhat major powers in Eastern Europe, they're saying, France, you did a great job of trying to stop these Germans, but you went too far.
Well, the thing is now, if you're not going to enforce that, what are you going to do if they come after me?
Exactly. Are you going to help protect me?
This was right on your border.
Who are you going to do? Who's going to help us?
Right.
Yeah.
And when you're a Poland, which is about a quarter the size of Germany, or you're Czechoslovakia, you're an eighth the size of Germany, you've got some fear.
You do.
And so Czechoslovakia starts building a defensive line on their border, which will come back. We'll come back to that. That's foreshadowing. Belgium drops out of its alliance with France and goes back to its state of neutrality.
Which is very odd.
Well, especially since the neutrality thing didn't work very well last time.
No, the Schlieffen plan was just straight
through them
and try to wrap around Paris. But
yeah,
gosh, Belgium, of course, is one that has been devastated by war.
Well, I mean, the war was on their country for pretty much the entire 4 years.
You're right, and again, starvation set in very quickly into that occupation by the Germans. You see a lot of this death, destruction, very similar to what the French had when they were fighting in this war. But again, they see the writing on the walls.
Without any realistic hope of ever stopping it. If they're allied with France and France and Germany go to war, it's going to happen again.
Exactly.
So they play the only card they've got. We're going to try to be neutral. Maybe this time Germany won't come through us. But when your country's a pancake,
yeah, it's almost
and leads directly towards Paris.
And it's very similar to the same thing on the other side of the Rhine, when you have, of course, Poland, and they are very flat, and they're very close to, a straight shot to Moscow.
Yeah, really.
You know, hey, what else are you going to do?
Not a lot of up and down in there.
It does not go well for you as a country.
For Hitler, this is a bonanza. Public relations.
Oh my gosh.
He's already made all the other political parties illegal. He's now winning elections, sort of like Putin.
But increasing himself as that savior of Germany.
Yes, he's putting himself up there as he is the one that's going to lead Germany, make Germany great again. Yeah. Honestly, that's literally a sign in one of their rallies: is make Germany something, and it basically is headed towards greatness.
Right.
I think in that one it's Judenfrei, Jew-free. But it's got that same undertone on all of it. We can't be great unless we get rid of the Jews. We can't be great unless we restore our borders.
Sure.
And then, of course, the rhetoric changes, because now the Treaty of Versailles is defunct.
Yeah.
So Hitler kind of takes a little break for 1937. He doesn't make any big foreign policy changes.
It's an off year for him.
Yeah, well, you got to rest up.
Yeah.
And, of course, the military is building up great blazes during this time.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Because he wants to be ready, because his next target is his homeland.
And he has to take that.
Well, and in his rhetoric, of course, he is very much about a German state for Germans.
Yes.
Austrians are Germans.
Right.
They speak German, they're ethnically German,
yes.
Blah, blah, blah. So Austria has to be part of Greater Germany. Großdeutschland.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, all of his flapping of gums is meaningless. And he does, for all of his other faults, he doesn't go back on his word, really. Well, to foreigners, yes, but to his own people,
he
promises things and he comes to deliver.
Right, and it leads us to then talking about this ultimate planned invasion of Austria.
That was his plan. Well, his plan is to, of course, put pressure on them to hopefully get them to capitulate naturally, but he doesn't believe that'll work.
So he builds up.
Yeah,
he builds up. He puts these military forces right along this southern border,
right down here in Munich,
in this area of where Hitler is originally from.
Right, Austria is his homeland, but he moved to Bavaria.
He moved to the borderland here just around the time of the outbreak of the war and World War I, I should say. But he is connected fairly well with Austria. And again, you also have to realize they're brothers in arms, and they've fought with each other for
they're basically
hundreds of years. Yes, right.
The president, Schuschnigg, Schuschnigg. He has already done the same thing Hitler done. He's a proto-fascist. He's outlawed parties, but he has no desire to be second fiddle or gone.
Right.
He believes Austria should be Austria. He might have dreams of restoring the empire, but it's not going to be with Germany at the lead.
No. He wants to be that savior of Austria-Hungary, which...
Yes, well, or at least Austria. He might not care about Hungary.
Right, I couldn't blame the guy.
But Schuschnigg is trying everything he can do to placate Hitler, but at the same time, there's no way to placate somebody who wants to swallow you whole.
Exactly.
So the Nazi party in Austria is starting riots, leading to civil disorder, which of course Hitler offers to help with.
Of course,
so such a kind and giving person.
Hey, and he's the puppet master, the marionette here. So
Hitler eventually pushes him to the point where basically you resign, and you give your office to this Seyss-Inquart, who is the leader of the Nazi party in Austria. Again, or you will be invaded.
Right. So he gives him the ultimatum that says, okay, listen, you must advocate or at least resign, and then I'm going to put my puppet guy in, and we'll just come on in, which in a way works well for both parties.
Well, unless you're Schuschnigg.
Right. Well, okay. What I mean by this is the fact that Germany does not have to waste that money and that time and the effort to go in and actually invade Austria, which I don't think there would be much of a resistance movement anyway, because you do have a lot of Nazi occupation there as it is. The people of Austria, they see what's going on in Germany, and they don't want to have to be fighting a war.
And in the Western Austria, that might be very true. It was definitely much more Nazi-friendly, I guess.
Sure.
Maybe not Nazis, but friendly. I mean, they saw what Germany was doing economically, and their country wasn't having that success.
And so they wanted some of that pie.
So if that's what helps them, feed their kids, that's important to them. But in Eastern Austria, especially around Munich, or not Munich, but Vienna, it's a little bit more democratically organized.
You have a lot of colleges, and you have a lot of liberal thinking to help.
It's home of Freud, people like that.
Right.
So, but Schuschnigg tries everything. He's out there beating the drum, trying to get help. He goes to Great Britain and France, and they're basically not interested in talking. I'm not even sure they pick up the phone.
Well, and I don't think they would either, because again, Great Britain is in the idea of it's not my problem.
Yeah, exactly. We don't get involved unless it's balance of power.
Exactly.
And France is like, we couldn't do it if we wanted to.
Right.
We're just broke right now.
Right.
And Austria doesn't mean that much to them.
No.
And he's a fascist himself.
So we don't want to continue this fascist style of government in a democratic-led society. So we ultimately see now a way of trying to, democratically allow Germany to, in a way, absorb this state of Austria.
So meanwhile in Vienna, Schuschnigg is now he realizes there's no foreign help.
He's grasping at straws as best
he
can.
He's now inviting the Social Democrats and even the socialists, who he detests. He's basically agrees to make their parties legal, which they hadn't been for a while. Basically restore free speech to them so they could run against him in an election. Anything to keep Hitler from coming in. But the pressure, Hitler is just browbeating this poor guy. Phone calls, ambassadors, the whole bit. Until he eventually just says, okay, we're going to have a plebiscite. We're going to have an election. We're going to put it out to the people. The people will decide. Because I think we're going to come right down to it. I think Schuschnigg was confident that no matter what people thought of him, that he knew there were enough Austrian patriots that they wouldn't want to be Germany.
How bad was that? We talk about this idea of patriotism and nationalism for the Austrians, but how much was that truth, you think?
I think in a lot of ways people are fairly loyal to their homelands. I think it's just a human thing.
Sure.
We build up to we're loyal to the people around us against foreigners, whether it's the next village over, the next valley, the next state. However high up on that totem pole we rise, but I don't know that he was wrong because we don't know what happened with the plebiscite because the night of it, the troops come across the border. There's utter confusion in the Austrian command. There's no fighting. It's just a German occupation. The Germans take over Austria in the space of 2 days, March 12th and 13th of 38. And then 2 months later, or a month later, they have their own plebiscite, which they win. Amazing enough.
99%.
99.47 or something ridiculously high like that. 99.7, 4, 6, something. It's got a lot of numbers, but it's pretty obvious that there was no Australian ballot where you go in and you close the curtain and you vote by yourself.
No, I think
there was literally Nazis at the polling stations with guns telling you that you were going to vote for this. And so the Nazi guy, this Seyss Inquart, is made chancellor, and hopefully we never come back to Austria and talk about him again.
Yeah, right. God,
it's hard to say his name. According to the Gestapo, so the German police, only a quarter to a third of voters in Vienna, which is the mass population of Austria, were in favor of the Anschluss. And even if you know, guesstimates can go up to 2/3, which would be pro-German. But the Austrian government after the war said it was only around 30%. Well, all those have to be taken with large shakers of salt, not just pinches or taste. We need whole shakers of salt because all of them have access to grind.
Of course.
You know, the Germans and pro-German would say it was 2/3. The
Austrians and pro-Austrians would probably say
a third is probably a good number. But, you know, given that the population centers were very anti, it wouldn't surprise me that it was, I mean, it probably was a close vote.
Right, it probably
realistically. Definitely not 99.7.
No.
Probably closer to maybe 50.7.
Right.
But I don't know which way the 50.7 would have gone.
Yeah, that would have been very, very close to decide to see. But regardless of that situation, you know, and of course, you know, hindsight is 2020. We see that without firing a shot, the Germans have now taken two major areas that were in a roundabout way, of course, with the Rhineland taken from them by treaty. Austria, of course, not actually a part of their empire, but German. Without firing a shot, they have now gained twice the number of territory.
Well,
they had prior to.
They added a population of about 10 million people. Well, I mean, they don't really add population. That's still counted.
No, of course not.
But for Austria, they added about 8 to 10 million people. I mean, it was a fairly advanced country. It wasn't like they got Zimbabwe or Bulgaria.
Right.
And of course, they all speak German.
So it's easier to govern them.
Well, you integrate them into your army without any hitches. There's no need to have a separate corps for Austrians versus Germans because you all speak German.
Right. Later on, we will find that this is a problem for the Germans.
Well, it's a problem for anybody that has a multinational, multilingual country.
Of course.
Doing that kind of thing. And again, what is the response from the great powers?
Okay.
Where's Austria? That's probably the American response.
Exactly. We're thinking, Austria?
But
you mean Australia?
But again, you look at it from a German, say you live in Wisconsin, where you're either German or related to a German.
Yeah.
Most likely. All you see is two German countries becoming one. You don't know the details about the browbeating and all the stuff. You just heard there was a plebiscite and Germans now own Austria, so you assume they won.
Yeah, it's not a big deal of how it happened, or you don't read into the big details. But again, in almost you probably think, hey, this is a great thing. We're restoring unity of the Germans.
Well, it's Woodrow Wilson, one of his 14 points, that right to self-determination.
Exactly.
We have all these ethnic Germans now join with Germany. Makes perfect sense. So we move on because, well, it's not that important to us.
Right.
It's important to Hitler because, once again, popularity-wise, huge. It does cause a little bit of a tiff with Mussolini, who's a little upset about his northern border not being altered in his favor. But he couldn't really throw a lot of guff because, again, he would have been annexing Germans, which would have been a big mistake as we see Hitler move on with his plan.
Right. Now, as you see here on the screen, you do see some of those green areas that are taken away at the end of World War.
There it is.
Yeah, thank you, Jim Vanna White. The idea, of course, that those new states of Czechoslovakia, splitting of Austria-Hungary, getting the kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and the Slovenes?
Yes.
Yes, the Slovenes. We see here that, again, like we just mentioned, Italy is starting to get a little iffy, which I can see why. But the idea is this: we want, as German-speaking people, we want to be together. That idea of a unified German realm.
And this goes back to the 1800s when Germany was unified.
Right.
The idea originally was that Prussia and Austria-Hungary would merge, and there would be this giant pan-German empire.
How crazy would that have been?
But what they called the Kleindeutschers, the little Germany, they didn't want all those other nationalities that Austro-Hungary had, like the Hungarians. They didn't want them.
No.
They didn't want the Slovenes or the Croats. They didn't want any of those people.
The Slavs at all.
And Austria-Hungary wasn't going to give them up.
No.
So that plan went away. But
Right.
Hitler is literally rebuilding that same idea, because now there is no reason to add these people who aren't German into your empire.
Right.
So he goes to the next spot, the next biggest place in Europe that is filled with Germans, about 3/4 of the population of an area known as the Sudetenland.
Of course.
Which is, I'll stand up even, is basically this area. Basically everything that touches Germany that's in Czechoslovakia is the Sudetenland. It's hilly, mountainous territory, but it's home to a good portion of their exports and their industries. They make the glass that Prague is famous for. Toys, tanks. And of course coal and iron mining.
Of course.
Huge things there. Czechoslovakia, of course, is like, whoa, time out.
Let's reassess things here. We see that the Austrians in their plebiscite have now voted to have this. We have now the Sudetenland, or not the Sudetenland, but the Rhineland, and eventually we'll also see some of the military buildup on the Ruhr. But if you're Czechoslovakia, you're like, wow, I better either build up or cave in.
And they do the same thing. Well, they'd already started doing the same thing that the French had done.
Sure.
They started building their own Maginot Line.
Of course.
In those mountains, which is a really good place to have a Maginot Line.
Oh, yes.
So possibly even more effective than the Maginot Line eventually.
Eventually, yes, because again, as you may or may not know of some of the geography along that western border or the eastern border of France and Germany, the Maginot Line is on a plain. You may have forested area, but you're not having much of
mild hills. It's like northern Missouri.
Right.
There's not this way up and down.
Along the border here in Czechoslovakia, you have some major mountainous areas that are easily fortified. You're not going to see You're not going to see many tanks be able to go through here.
Not off the roads, for sure.
You're not going to be able to see much of your massive movement of troops because they're kind of into those choke points. And again, you're thinking about it in terms of how can we protect our people.
Yes. And of course, Czechoslovakia has a treaty with France.
Right.
But they're getting a little shaky since the Rhineland got reoccupied and then Austria gets taken. That's just 6 months ago. We're into September of 1938 now. And the Germans start, Hitler, I should say Hitler.
Right.
Hitler
Right.
starts banging the drum that he wants the Sudetenland because it's 3/4 German, blah, blah, blah.
Keep Germany
German.
Yes.
Again, if you were, I don't know about the French or the British, but if you were ever going to have a propaganda campaign to keep America out of the war, he's banging on the right drum.
Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson was a well thought of president, with a bonus point for dying.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, so he's really hitting that nerve. He doesn't want a bunch of Czechs. He doesn't want to subjugate people. He wants to liberate them. It's a great chance to use the language against opponents, because he just wants those things. And the Czechs are like, not no, but hell no.
Right.
But they're a country of 10 million people. And Germany's 80 million people. This is something that's terrifying to Beneš, who is the president at the time. He's in trouble. And so Hitler keeps pushing. And Mussolini, gotta love the Moose, he comes up with this cool idea of having a great power conference to settle the problem of the Sudetenland.
Yes, because all major meetings that come out of great powers end well.
Yes. Treaty of Versailles.
Right. And so we see by when was that? That was around September?
August, I think, is when Mussolini calls for the actual meeting. But it happens fairly early in September, and Mussolini, he's hoping, his big hope, of course, is to get chunks of British Africa.
Oh, yes.
He's looking for something to connect Ethiopia and Libya. That's his dream.
Right.
And the British own everything in between.
Uh-huh.
So he wants to use his position as mediator.
Oh.
He doesn't have any interest in Sudetenland.
I don't want any of that territory there.
Peace.
Yes, well, we eventually come up with this idea of what is the Munich Conference, which, of course, Munich down in the southern portion, right by Austria, that Hitler just re-assimilated into German culture.
But it's a half an hour drive to Hitler's nice little place up in the mountains that I went to a couple years ago.
The Hawk's Nest, huh?
Yes, the Eagle's Nest.
Oh, the Eagle's Nest, there you go.
And the tea house there on the top of the mountain was really cool.
I bet.
Very pretty, great views, and very isolated, so very easy for security and for visiting world leaders. As a world leader going to Hitler's Germany, I might more be worried my escape routes. But
yes, I would definitely be thinking.
I'd be talking to M and see if I could get one of those, glider backpacks that I could conceal in my wallet or something.
Oh gosh.
But Hitler uses one of the better negotiating tactics that's out there: separate the Allies and talk to them separately.
Right.
So he talks to Chamberlain and convinces Chamberlain that for peace, if he gets the Sudetenland, it'll be the last territorial demand in Europe that I have.
Okay.
Which I find it very interesting that he included the in Europe.
Right.
I'm like, did he have a plan to start asking for colonies back?
Did he want to go to
like
Africa,
Tanzania,
or
Cameroon?
Right. Was he looking to get his Pacific Islands back from the British and the French?
I don't know. It's just interesting.
Regardless of it, he separates Chamberlain. He's separating Daladier, the Prime Minister of France, and saying, hey, we're not going to attack you. We're not going to go into your territory. We want ethnic Germans to be a part of us.
And Daladier, of course, it's kind of like the interrogation, where you have two criminals and you interrogate them separately. You say the other one flipped and the other one,
Right.
So you can get a confession.
Chamberlain says it's an amazing idea. He'll let this happen.
Yes, exactly.
Why don't you just say, okay, we'll go from there?
So they come back. They do all this preliminary negotiation. They finally agree. They reach Munich. They have their big meetings. Like take the picture, shake hands.
Oh yes.
Yeah. No, not yet. That's Churchill.
Oh right. Forgot.
Yeah. Chamberlain's too much of a fuddy-duddy. He just does his hat thing.
Right. He's a gentleman.
Anyway, you have this meeting. So the great powers, France, Britain, Germany, even Italy gets to show up to have this conference to determine the fate of Czechoslovakia.
There's somebody missing.
Who is that?
Who might be missing? I have no clue. Oh,
right. Yeah, the people who are actually involved in getting their country taken away from them. And that is Mr. Beneš and his prime minister. Neither one of them. I don't know if there's anybody that had any Czech blood in Munich.
Doubtful. Highly doubtful.
And the great powers agree that Czechoslovakia should surrender to Germany and give them the Sudetenland. And Benez, of course, has, where does he turn? He's got no allies. His two allies just sold him up the river.
Exactly. So.
And he doesn't want to call Moscow.
Of course not.
That's not going to happen. So he has to agree. It's either that or go to war, a war he can't win.
And again, that's the thing. You got to realize that even though he is building up along the mountainous areas of the Sudetenland, there's nothing he can do.
I mean, he could. I wouldn't be surprised if the Czechs wouldn't have gone to war, but the problem is they would have been fighting a war in fortifications surrounded by ethnic Germans, who it'd be kind of like us with the Japanese on the coast. Can we even trust them? We don't know if we can.
Which again, yes, you're exactly right. What are we to do if we are a Czech army, speaking Czech,
fighting Germans
who are
with Germans behind us?
Right. It's like, we're gonna cut our own throats to try and save our own skin. It doesn't work so well for the Czechs.
It works so poorly that the Czech army is basically done, because once you move through the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia is flat.
It's
easy. There's no defensible terrain. There's nowhere that you could say, okay, well, we wasted all that money on the little Maginot Line. We'll build a new one in this next. There's just nowhere to do it.
Because you're literally just going to see them go, whoop, okay, here we go.
Right.
And let's take the capital and the rest of your nation. But again, it just doesn't make sense for the Czechs to even put up a fight.
So, basically the 1st of October, Hitler moves into the Sudetenland. And Poland gets a chunk too. They take a little bitty chunk over northern Czechoslovakia that was, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was mostly occupied by ethnic Poles.
Yeah.
So yet again, like you said, what could go wrong with, a group of great powers drawing maps? Mm-hmm. Well, there you go. Why are there ethnic Poles in Czechoslovakia when Poland's right there?
Right.
It would have been much simpler just to carve out a little section.
And it does you're right, it does go back to Wilson's 14 points. Mm-hmm. Having people of the same ethnicity under the same government. Why not?
That fulfills that goal of sovereignty.
Right.
You have to have that, what's the word? Cohesion.
Right.
In your people. But Hitler's foreign policy is very aggressive. Other than that big gap between the Ruhr Valley and that's mainly because he's building an army.
Of course.
But then, every 6 months he's doing something new, and we'll see that next time when we start talking about what happens to the rest of Czechoslovakia.
Right.
As we move into 1939, that fateful year.
Oof. Anyway, please make sure you come back and join us for the next installment of What Happens Next.
Yes.
And the idea of how Hitler is going to really come to be. Again, hit that like button, hit us a share button, and please make sure you follow us. Take care.